Hey everybody, welcome to this afternoon's Amex Trade panel. I am Andrew Zimmer and I'm moderating this incredible group on a fascinating topic and one that has tremendous impact, I think, for all of us, not only in this room, but on this planet. I think I've rarely been overwhelmed by a topic on a panel, and I've moderated hundreds over the years. And the reason that I'm overwhelmed by this one is that it touches every single piece of every single human being's existence on planet Earth. The impact of some of the issues that we're talking about today are not just felt on our plates and in our pockets, but on our planet. And as someone who has been head, ass, and overcoat into these issues for about 20 years, at a lot of different levels, right now trying to effectuate legislative change on Capitol Hill, simply because it's what I believe is where the social justice movement, sufficient to recover from these problems, has to be resolved. And we're talking about the changing culinary landscape, and there really should be a hyphen after that, followed by a question mark. Because there are issues that we're going to talk about today that may mean that certain culinary landscapes are no longer. When coral reefs are dying, when watersheds are eroding, when farmland is evaporating, when factory farming, pollution, on and on and on, rising ocean temperatures, et cetera, are drastically affecting weather patterns. When you see what's going on in Eastern Africa, East Central Africa right now, you can understand the impact that the issues of environmental, economic, and nutritional concerns around the globe have not just impacted Anya's Ranch, Ludo, or Jonathan, or Mike's restaurants, or our customers. It's a much more global issue. So, having said that, a huge thank you to the folks at the Jerome, at Amex, at Baltz & Company for putting on another stellar weekend here in Aspen. We have a diverse range of brilliant people around me, some of whom I've known for a very long time, some of them I've only met a couple times, but all of whom are keenly aware of how these issues impact their business, but they're also big thinkers. Jonathan Sawyer, to my right, your left, from Cleveland, Ohio, representing Cleveland, Ohio, weighing 185 pounds of romping, stomping pig iron. Mike Latta from Charleston. Lots of bios and information about all the restaurants in your information, or Google that shit. If you don't know who they are, well, everyone knows who they are. From Los Angeles, my friend Ludo Lefebvre. You have to have a token rancher in the group, but Anya Fernald from Belcampo is here today with us. So, I mean, there's the macro, right? And then there's the micro. And I think I'd love it if we could have a quick personal statement from each of you about how the issues of the physically changing culinary landscape, has impacted your business, because we have businessmen, restaurateurs, and then we have someone who comes at it from an entirely different point of view. And so I'd love to know in your business, and all of you have been doing it for a long time, long enough to see the changes just in the last decade. So let's try to confine it to that so we have some boundaries around this so we don't spill out all over the place. But maybe, Jonathan, you want to talk about in the last 10 years, how it's changed for you, both from the customer-facing standpoint, what they want,
Yep.
what you're serving them, and actually how it works for you through the back door.
Yeah. And, I think maybe my inspiration might help give that a nice backdrop as well. My wife and I, when we opened the Greenhouse Tavern 9 years ago, it was the first certified green restaurant in the state of Ohio, which is just the third-party audit, and the Good Food 100 does a great job as well now. There's a lot of these groups that do it, but for us, it was really important to, do whatever we could for this one address in this one city to make the world a better place, to make our industry look a little bit more positive, and to give our children and our grandchildren something better than our parents gave us. We're oversimplifying it here, but at the end of the day, we started composting downtown, we started recycling downtown, blah, 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 all that stuff. But I think, the backbone of it really was doing, putting our money where our mouth is, doing something, even if it is teeny, in this one space. And like a lot of groundswells, right? It totally has consumed us for the past 10 years. We'll get really heavy soon, but I wanted to start off pretty light. So,
a little follow-up to that. I love the fact that you said, because I get asked all the time in response to a tweet or an Instagram, or if I'm giving a talk somewhere, please tell me, I don't know a lot about this. I need one or two things that I can do every day in my daily life that is going to help. Because we can change, I do believe we can change the world one plate at a time, one footstep at a time, and we can all do something to actually prevent our culinary landscape from literally changing too much to the point where we don't have one. So I absolutely love that. And compost, those kinds of things were foreign to the restaurant business for many, many years. A lot of people were doing them at home, those who were socially conscious. And it's great now that restaurants are, do you know how many restaurants in Cleveland now are doing that? Now recycling is the law there, right?
No, but there's a stat out there I could probably look
wife's
up before
shaking
the
your
end.
head. No, recycling's not the law there.
No, it's not the law.
Shame.
No, and in the beginning, we actually had to carry home the compost, and we had to walk about a quarter of a block away with the recycling every night into a parking spot that we rented to put our recycling dumpster. Yeah. But because of social awareness and social media, there was, about 6 months of us prodding and pressing, and then eventually everything consolidated. But it's still not solved, because every year or two somebody comes in with a different idea or wants to maximize another piece of land, or another tenant doesn't want to start recycling their grease, they just want to throw it in the dumpster. Yep. And all these little things that we take for granted that we make as protocol for our restaurants start to get upended. And when we're not there every day to see these little changes happen, it happens pretty quick, and then you gotta put it in the back of your car again until you get the dumpster back.
Yeah. At the Ordinary and at Fig, Mike, so much of what you've been cooking since you opened Fig is tethered to what comes out of the water, what comes out of the field and farm. And I know it's a very, very personal thing for you as a part of your cooking. And so I'm wondering, in the last 10 years, what you've seen, because a lot of positive change has come out of Charleston. It's been a huge influencer on the rest of the country. There's a bunch of chefs down there who have been incredible inspirations, you among them, for taking a stance about some of this stuff and helping to elevate certain ingredients and tell people that this is disappearing long before other voices were saying it's disappearing. So I'm wondering, changes you've seen over the last 10 years in your neck of the woods that maybe inspire you or give you pause still.
Well, what you may not know is that I got my first chef job when I was in my early 20s, and I had no mentor, or had not gone to culinary school, or no real cultural cue to cook a certain kind of food a certain way. I just worked hard and was in the right place in the right time. But when I was in a position to create a menu, I didn't really have anything to offer. So I started thinking about, if I want to be a chef and stay competitive, what can I do to put better food in the plate? So while in Atlanta, I started, sourcing local food, and I happened to get into a group of like-minded folks on the growing side that formed a co-op, and then before I knew it, a year later, I was cooking very seasonally, and inspired by, and back in Atlanta then, back in the early 90s, I would get on my motorcycle, go to the farms, and we'd walk the fields, and this is not new to anybody really, but it profoundly affected the way that I looked at food, the relationships that I had with the people that produced it, and then and what was clear to me early on was this is the best product that I can get. So let me just take, if I find great leeks, then I'll do a leeks vinaigrette because that's good, and I can do that, right? But the product, the the produce was the star, and like my relationship to those producers really is where I got a lot of my inspiration. So imagine cooking like that year after year and trying to get better at it and better at it. You don't really understand after a while how to cook any other way. So fast forward going to Charleston, which for some of you that don't know, it's a little peninsula surrounded by beautiful waters with like what appears to be still a lot of seafood. And then the rest of the rural part around Charleston is very agrarian. So there are lots of fields, lots of farms. Not, of course, that's not an easy life, and there's not a lot of farms that are doing great, but the land is there and the land is cheap, so there's opportunity for people. But as I got to Charleston, it became clear to me. I actually moved there because somebody had offered me a job there, and I met one of the most prolific growers I'd ever met in my life, and said, well, if she'll sell to me, then I'll move to Charleston and try to implement the local food program into your restaurant. So, flash forward a few years, I decided to open my own restaurant. And back then, in Charleston, I would say in the East Coast in general, restaurants were based on proteins and sauces, and quite often the exotic ingredients were the stars. Like, look at this, I can get this Scottish prawn. I can get this, caviar from, the Baltic regions. And, I think we said, well, why don't we celebrate the stuff that we have here, which sounds funny saying that now. But I just took what I had known and what I'd been teaching myself and applied it in Charleston and realized that I was in a very special place. So for the last 15 years now, it's been my job to protect it, really. And how have I done that? I've just made an outlet for people who grow and catch and raise animals to know that they can come to us. And then our community is so tight, and the chef community there is, everybody's is very convivial. We share producers, and we say, okay, we found somebody who's now producing the best chickens and the best eggs. Let's all buy from them and buy all let's make sure the demand exceeds the supply and let them grow. So we kind of, in a way, as a community, partner with these people and say, if you do something special and meaningful, then we're going to make sure that you have an outlet for it. And that's gone, we've done that with all kinds of producers. And so the challenge is we've seen cycles in years where growers that we bought from for a number of years decided to, throw in the towel because the farming life is tough. We've got one captain's boat in Charleston that catches fish. We get phone calls from the sat phone to see, hey, I just landed because in Charleston you have to go way out. Just caught an 80-pound wahoo. Do you think you'll take it? Yes, I will. And that person's a resource that provides an experience. At the end of the day, we want to provide a great experience as well, right? So like now we have this person we're making sure that boat stays afloat and that business does well. And by the same token, we're able to actually still have some of the most amazing products. So the point is, like those relationships, as you develop them, you're helping the waterfront remain working with the oystermen and the shrimpers and the fishermen. You're keeping the farming community alive by creating an outlet, but then you're also creating a dialogue in the city that says, hey, we're not New York, we're not LA, we're not wherever, we're Charleston, and this is what we have to use, and let's celebrate that because that's our best resource. So in many ways, we've banded together through all of our like-mindedness to help our community flourish, but also it also just helps the community look better from a distance. Like when you come to Charleston, you eat those eggs in 7 different restaurants when you're there for 4 or 5 days, you'll leave saying, man, those eggs in Charleston were amazing. And that's happening with all kinds of things that you have. And we all share the top tier restaurants, even the ones, because food's expensive, so it depends on your price point, but it seems our community in general really is in support of all these initiatives.
I see Charleston as a grow where you're planted community. I think the chefs there, homegrown, the ones that have gone there and opened restaurants, I think everybody there has sort of gotten behind that idea of supporting everything about that city. I think it's one of the things that makes Charleston such a unique and wonderful and attractive place to visit. It's very cool. Do you see, are people actually talking about that grow where you're planted? I mean, that idea that without supporting those people, because when I was there 4 or 5 years ago, and I went out with a clammer, shrimper, oysterman, and he pointed out to me, he said, to a large degree, the product I can't charge more than I do now, and the price that I sell for has been the same, but all of my costs go up every couple of months, from my kids' school books to the gasoline that I put in my in my putt-putt. So it needs a community to support, it needs a community of guest-facing people to support that community of...
Absolutely. So one things that I always say about Charleston is what makes a great food city? And of course, you could say resources, right? Like if you're living in California, obviously you're going to get some incredible produce and other things because it has the climate and it just happens easier there. And Charleston, one of the, if there was like a three-legged stool, and there was an equation about why has it become a food city, well, resources would be one leg, and I think, maybe you could argue talent would be a second leg, but then the third leg would be the clientele and the people that come to eat in the city, because they're, it's a tourist city in many ways. We see like 5 or 6 million people a year, and they're coming there at this point now to dine, so their dollars, they're a little more liberal with their spending. So we have the advantage, which I know, I'm sure in Cleveland it's not maybe the same way, or in other cities where you don't have that kind of influx of cash, where people are saying, I've come here to dine, so I'm not afraid to spend $85 a head versus what in a more, a less, a community like Columbia, South Carolina, you'd be lucky to get 35. So that changes the equation quite a bit.
But across, you talked about tiers of restaurants across every, I just got back from there. We were just there. We were there together.
Yeah.
But across in every strata in the restaurant, where I see everyone there trying to do what they can to support that. And yes, people at the top of that equation, where you are, can do more because you can charge more. But that whole idea of a fair price for good food seems to be pervasive in that city.
So, you reminded me of a story. So we influence is what we're talking about, right? And we had a boat. So bluefin tuna is a no-no, right? We had a boat that a boat that was struggling to stay afloat, right? The business was in jeopardy, and somehow they had a bluefin permit, and somebody caught a bluefin that so this is all above board. So however it comes off in the story, they'd gotten the boat and they were going to sell. They'd gotten the tuna and they were going to sell it to us. So they call us and say, we've got this bluefin, and we're like, yikes! If we put that on our menu, we're going to hear from it. So I called the Sustainable Seafood Initiative in Charleston, which is based out of the aquarium, and I was like, listen, I'm having a bit of a problem processing this quandary here. Like, I don't want to support bluefin tuna, but I also want to make sure that this boat, I want to buy the product off this boat. I know how it was caught. It was incidental. And so I ended up buying it. And we talked about it. We said, listen, you have a responsibility to all kinds of things. You can't just be one-sided with it.
And often there are cross purposes, and it's not easy.
And the first email that I got the next morning was, how dare you? How many chefs do you think look up to what you and your restaurants do, but they don't know the story that we've talked about? Just like that. Eventually, I spoke to the man about it, and he's like, they don't know the story. And I was like, you know what? I said, it's sticky, and it's difficult, but I know that my intentions are great, and what we're trying to do is good. And sometimes we might make a mistake, but in that case, I didn't think that we did. It was an incidental catch. But so we're aware of the fact that as a community, what we do is definitely because it's so competitive as well. So if we start using a certain species, other people want to use it, and I'm not trying to get off topic here, but
it's very on topic.
Yeah. So so we have to think very carefully about what we do. But also in Charleston, right? There's a ton of restaurants, and one reason why we all still I think a lot of people are clamoring for the best product too is because it's competitive.
Yeah. And like you said, people are down there, coming down there to eat.
And there's a big difference in people are coming down to eat.
I was going to apologize for not doing ladies first and talk to Ludo and keep the restaurant string going, but I think Mike tilted the conversation to a place that I wanted to talk to you about, which is, as a producer of food, as a custodian of land, as someone who is one of those people who is selling product, concerned with watershed, all the issues sort of converge. You're our representative producer, right? Hearing the two of them talk, I'm wondering what would you want to tell the folks in the audience about the best ways for them to consider their food choices in a way that's supportive of making sure that our planet and those foods are still around for the next generation to enjoy, or maybe just people to enjoy in the next 5 years?
Wow, so...
Without being too depressing.
Yes. You know, I started our company as, we are a farm. We have our own slaughterhouse. We have 25,000 acres across Northern California, and we raise beef and pork along all the poultry, lamb, et cetera. And 100% of my products are sold in our own restaurants and butcher shops. And so we built the restaurant business to make really good farming possible, which is, this isn't the right audience to necessarily say it, but the issue underlying that is that really good farming is not possible in the current dynamic of how meat particularly is bought and sold. So I spent years trying not to open restaurants initially because it's challenging and capital intensive and extremely high risk exposure. But for us, the issue was that only 9% of a beef is steak. Only 9% can be thrown on the grill and cooked quickly. Unfortunately, just the way the market is and the way that Americans now cook, we want stuff to happen very quickly. And so it's very easy to sell that 9%. Well, the way that I raise beef, we're entirely perennial pasture. We're certified carbon positive, Animal Welfare Association approved, organic certified, of course. Those are very expensive. Each one of those is just like dollar signs, right? So I can't make that money back on 10%, 9% of the beef, unfortunately. I need the whole beef to generate more dollars. So currently in my system, we generate about 15 grand per beef, which allows us to profitably farm absolutely the right way. And to do that, we have burger restaurants, and then we can sell all the steaks that we possibly can produce through our butcher shops and then some in our restaurants as well. So the math is really challenging. And the reality is that good quality product is just a heck of a lot more expensive to produce. Part of it's because of subsidies, but I think that we should be aware of as consumers is that this is going to cost more, unfortunately. There's no easy solution. And meat's the worst offender. It's also the hardest nut to crack, which is why it's really fun and challenging, but it is also something that there aren't easy answers. And there isn't a way where I think we can just say we're going to toggle or flip to a more sustainable system. One of the biggest issues, and I think what we as a culinary community need to work through, is helping more good quality meat producers achieve scale. And that's really the future for us the next 5 to 10 years. There are a lot of good players out there that are tiny. I think we all know them from the farmers markets, the guys who are 20 or 30 beef and selling it out of bags and working with a couple chefs who are well-intentioned. And we see those guys disappearing every year as well because, frankly, it's a really tough road to hoe. There's very little money in it, and there's a huge amount of risk for them. So what we need to do is, I think, help some producers achieve scale, get bigger herds, get efficiencies of scale, which is...
Are you helping to, having solved a lot of those problems for yourselves, regardless of size, acreage, the restaurants, are you helping to develop models and sort of open source those things with other people? Is that part of the way of doing things at your company?
We're open to it.
Yeah.
We've shared models for our slaughterhouse, which is not probably the stickiest, hairiest part of our business. I've been very open with people who've been interested in opening slaughterhouses. Unfortunately, there's not that many people. The world of sustainable production, our beef herd of right now 2,500 is something like 10 times bigger than the next biggest guy doing our style of agriculture. So it's a really big gulf, and that's what I'm interested in seeing in the next few years around sustainability in meat is, can more producers achieve scale? And also, I think the mandate on the chefs is, what other cuts can we be using? Whole pigs are easy to move through a system, and it's the beef that really represents the challenge. And unfortunately, beef is what we want to eat in the U.S. So that's a real challenge for the culinary audiences. How do you help producers sell more product or work together with other chefs to be able to buy direct?
Well, you talked about size, and I think that's a really, really important thing to consider because you also talked about expense. Because one of the ways that you get around that is, you can still eat beef every day that you want, but instead of having a 12-ounce steak at dinner, maybe you're having a 6-ounce steak at dinner, right? The meat's still moving through. We can produce less of it because we eliminate the factory farm and we start to diversify the other things on the table that we're eating. I mean, 3 generations ago, it was a 16-ounce steak, a scoop of mashed potatoes or a baked potato and half a broccoli head, right? And help yourself to the salad bar. And that was a restaurant, but that was also home dining to a great degree as well. Are you in your restaurants finding that you're messing around with portion and stuff like that too?
Portion, and also it's the hangers, the Denvers, the flaps.
Sure.
I mean, that's really where the money's at for us. And so
Right.
when you move from just the middle meat, so the beautiful big ribs, that's where you have your most precious steaks on a beef. You actually have lots more very tender pieces that in places like France they use a lot more of, bavettes and picanhas. So that's really actually a lot more money for the producer. You can take, you can get up to 25% of more grillable cuts if you're open as a chef to cooking those meats. So that's been a challenge. That's a huge education and cultural piece. His turn now?
Yeah, that's the French in national. I'm here for Save America. Super Ludo.
Every time someone says the word France around him,
All the
I
time.
play the anthem.
Yeah.
Never do panels with your friends.
Yeah. Yes, you
No, I wanted to continue with that because it is a great lead-in into what I wanted to talk to Ludo about, because he does come from a tradition where utilizing everything is just how you cooked, right? And you talk about angry letters. I went and I do stories, in farms halfway around the world, and those weird striated cuts behind the shoulder where there's just two fan pieces of meat, and cut a piece through it on the grill, and I'd rather eat that than anything in the center of the animal. It's just a mind boggler. And then I try to tell people, eat the whole animal. They're these wonderful, funky things, or maybe it's the balls, right? Or maybe it's the scrotal sac, which in Chile is delicious. Don't knock it till you tried it. But the fact that is extreme, and I don't expect Americans to do it, but if you're not trying all those pieces of the animal, right, there's something lacking. And then I get angry letters because I had to take a plane to do it, and my carbon footprint is messed up.
Well, it's kind of interesting, the actual math of it. The racks of a beef are like a big slice of bread. You just cut the steaks off of it. You can make them as thick or as thin as you want. All of these other cuts actually require a lot more attention from the butcher. And you only have 2 of them per animal. You have 2 tri-tips, 2 hangers, 2 strips. I mean, these are these flaps here, they're little parts. They're the load-bearing parts of the belly of the animal. And they take a lot more skill. So it's interesting, it's like tied in too to the whole de-skilling of the American meat system. Our system on both ends, we want cheap inputs and cheap outputs. And part of that is just saying, well, out of beef, we get steaks, which come from this one part, and we get grind, which comes from the whole rest of it. We have to push back against that model. That's part and parcel of the agro-industrial system, is believing in the slice of bread steaks, and everything else goes in the grinder. And people, in our shops all the time, butchers come in who've been butchers for 15 years, and they've never seen a Denver, they've never seen a velvet. And these are steaks that our grandparents ate happily. They were considered more flavorful because, a little bit of action. I mean, the actual ribs, those racks of the meat, they're only used when the animal jumps or it mates. And so in exceptionally free-range animals, you get a bit more, aerobic action in there. But in general, a flat iron is hands down way more delicious than a ribeye, I think. I mean, when I do blind tastings, people dig the flat iron. So I think that those are cuts that we can actually make a lot of money off if we teach our teams how to cook them appropriately, how to prepare them, and that actually supports the farmer incredibly.
The de-skilling of food in America, I think, it's everywhere from the butcher shop to the public school system where there's no more equipment to cook. I mean, we've actually de-skilled in everywhere along in our food system, which I think is a frightening thing as well. Another reason I think we need to legislate that back into the system. In a great nod to the French culinary tradition and the American food tradition is a couple hundred years old, unless you are talking about the food of our first peoples. And so we're constantly, I think, having to learn both from our own history, right, as Americans, from the native peoples, and from all the other cultures around the world. And I think Anya brought up a great point that some of this conversation in restaurants in other cultures, from China to France to Senegal to Chile, they laugh about us having to struggle to eat all of an animal because that's just the way it's always been done, from tête de veau to, braising shanks. So And I know that you have, you know, at this point in your career, are trying to push a lot of that forward and get people to consider new things in new ways. So I'm wondering from a cultural standpoint, growing up, and from the idea of what French food represents to what you're doing now with the business in LA, you know, where do you feel the responsibility lies on your shoulders, and what are you trying to do to solve some of these problems that face us?
I'm French. I grew up in France. I trained in France.
Real French.
3-star Michelin restaurant. And yeah, you learn really over there to use everything. You know, you get screamed, you get abused. If you put a little piece of herbs in the garbage, you know, you almost get fired. But the thing I think the most important thing is chefs, we need to educate our clientele how to change their taste a little bit about what to eat. Sometimes all of you, you know, you need to change. That's you guys. No, seriously, I'm serious. Because, you know, sometimes I try to do a steak frit. I sell a lot of steak frit at the restaurant, a lot. And when I opened the Petit Trois, which is a classic French restaurant, I really want to do the steak frit like really like the French way. What's the French way? The French way, sorry, it's with a rump steak. With rump steak, you know, it's a little can be chewy. In France, we eat our meat, you know, a little bit more chewy. And in France, our meat is less fat than here in America. All of you people from America, you know, if the meat is a little chewy, you complain. That's all your fault. I try to change things, but you know, so I'm joking. But at the end of the day,
hey, I want them to eat more balls. Yeah. I mean, don't.
Not me.
Yeah, the scrotum steak did not go
over
well.
Thing, you know, the thing, you know, for the chef, sometimes, you know, it's when you try to change and use a different cut of the beef, people are not used to eat and less fatty and more tough. People complain, and after you're losing customer, so it's very stressful for us as a chef. It's stressful, madam. Yes. And so now I'm back with ribeyes. Because people complain after, you know, the meat is too tough and they don't want it. I'm going to go back to France. No, but I think everybody needs to be responsible. The chef needs to be responsible to really responsible about what we serve, but also the guests too. The guests need to be more open and listen to the chef a little bit and stop to complain, guys, please.
Don't you think, though, that over the course of the last 10 years, people are more willing to go into, I mean, I think it's certainly the case in the restaurants that you guys all own because they're trusting the experience. If it's on the menu, they will order it. I think there's other places in other restaurants where they're not, you know, and it's sort of being brave everywhere, I think is a responsibility if we're all going to change, you know. But, I mean, do you really find that you have a hard time selling some odds and ends? Or
a good example, I have a restaurant called Trois Mecs. Trois Mecs is open for 4 years. It's a set menu. You have 6 courses. You pay before. Come on time. No, you cannot eat if you're late. And you eat what I want. That's it. Okay? We don't change anything for you guys. You eat what I want. And that's the best way for me. You know, but the thing interesting, sometimes in the set menu, we add another dish, a supplement. And last week, I did a sweetbread. Guess what? I don't sell any sweetbread. People don't want to eat.
Are you kidding?
No.
Wow. I think that's LA.
No, but guys, it's very interesting. You know, if I don't cook if I don't cook safe to serve a ribeye or a beautiful piece of a toro tuna or whatever, if I start to use a different part of the animals, like sweetbread, and trust me, I'm not really like awful guys, you know, like I don't like that much. Sorry, Andrew, but you know, but as a chef, I want to, you know, it's my responsibility to use everything.
See,
but people don't want to eat sweetbread, you know. It's just, you know, I don't know how to explain, but people are not adventurous, you know. We're all talking about how to save the planet, respect the planet, and blah 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 blah. But when people go to the restaurant, I don't do anything.
It's fascinating to me that in LA that your customer wouldn't order the sweetbreads because
as my manager, she's over there.
No, I believe you, but
it's true.
In other restaurants that I've been to, and I've eaten in all of your restaurants, I've not eaten in yours. The last time that I was at Greenhouse, I mean, there was a candle made of beef tallow that melted into a
amazing.
dip
Wow.
for my bread.
It's amazing.
And you know, the only things on the menu, not only, I'm exaggerating to make a point, were sweetbreads and fish collars and you know pig's ears and a half a pig's head, which is the ridiculously huge seller at the restaurant. So people are actually seeking that stuff out where you are.
Yeah.
Because then when I went back later for dinner the next night, the sweetbreads that were on the menu had been so popular they were gone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of gamesmanship in there too. You know, when we talk about the steak game, right? Like bistro versus strip versus Côte de Boeuf.
Right.
We found the most success putting options on the menu and knowing what our customers are going to order, knowing what Americans are going to order, and that's where our margin is. And then down where we want to sell, where we have the coulant or the softball or the picanha or the steaks that are chewier, those are the ones that we hardly make a penny on. But because until we have the pig's head following, they're not going to sell. So we're lucky to be in the same place for multiple years, but through those years and looking at our customers and understanding, we could charge up to $30 for a bistro steak, so we can make margin on it. Mm-hmm. If we just only had one option from day one and it was a bistro steak, our doors would have been closed.
Right.
But there's a reality in the gamesmanship that goes along with the changing of your customers, more tourism, which is now crazy for us. Only the past 2 years have we seen it, but we went from having a 50-50 blend of townies to tourists to 70-30 at Greenhouse.
That's awesome.
And it's an insane stat, but it is interesting to see people coming and spending money now because it does change the P-mix. They all do trust us, but do they trust us as much as our fans for the past 9 years?
Right.
It really does make a difference. Did I lose me?
Yeah, no.
The clientele, like I said before, and it's about, I think you can educate your staff to get people excited about trying different things, and I think how effectively you do that increases your chance of selling those things. Mm-hmm. Charleston has always been so good in that respect. So what we would do with steak, we'd get a side of beef, and we would cut it up, and we'd have, of course, the strips and the ribeyes and the sirloin, but then we keep going through the leg and seeing what we could do for steak, and then what we would do is we would say to the server, so we've just gotten a side of beef in from a farm down the street, which is not very Charleston, by the way. There's not a lot of beef there. It's a Jersey cow to boot. And we would say, if you want a steak tonight, we can't tell you what cut you're going to have until it's in front of you. So you might get a ribeye, you might get a strip, you might get a sirloin, you might get a piece of the leg. We assure you that you're going to like it, or if you don't, then we'll deal with it at that point. But we found very little pushback to that. I think people found it to be kind of exciting, and we eventually started slipping in a little bit of heart in there, and
it's a great way to.
And generally speaking, we found that people were very accepting of us doing that, and it became kind of. And we're not a steak restaurant, so people aren't coming there for steak in general. So maybe this was a reason to get the steak. But I think I don't want to take credit for that. But it was just experimenting like that with our guests. We found it to be an easy way for us to.
It's a great idea and make it more interesting. You had something to say after Ludo had finished, and it.
No, building as well on what Mike was saying, it's about setting expectations for customers.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you say you're going to get a steak and then you bring out a velvet, they're going to be bummed out, right? And I've also had the experience of trying to present these other steaks on a steak board, like bringing them out beforehand, which is a double bummer.
Yeah.
Because then they see this little measly brown thing, and it's nothing like the sexiness of a big, beautiful tomahawk or something. So it's about teaching your servers, also slicing it very thin against the grain, setting the expectations beforehand. Another key thing that we're just building on a lot right now is connecting products to people's health. Tying it into health makes people feel more comfortable about making odd choices. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest driver that I see for people coming in and eating awful. The only thing that gets somebody to jump off into their first awful experience is because their trainer or they read about it, something connected to personal health and hearing about the micronutrients in liver and things like that. So what we often do is say, our animals get a lot of exercise, they're going to have very oxygenated muscles, they're going to be a slightly more beefy flavor. Setting that expectation really reduces the risk that they're going to be let down. We, of course, still have customers that are let down, But early on, we didn't do that enough, and we had a much higher failure rate in terms of just expectations around that product.
In terms of skill set and whole animal usage, the amateur saloonists and the explosion of the legitimate artisanal food, meat preservation arts, I think they are kind of making a comeback, both within restaurants, right? You do your own,
Yeah.
And you probably buy some stuff from other purveyors,
Yeah.
right?
But setting the expectation, just like everyone's saying, that's the whole game, with that too. Like we koji cured this copa ourselves, but this prosciutto di Parma is from Parma because they do
Right.
it way better than we do.
Okay. Is the basement of your house still filled with vats of vinegar?
It's actually in the office now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to.
Yeah,
just wanted to
3,000
make sure.
gallons
No, okay. That's good.
of vinegar.
All right.
Don't
It's
tweet
the
that.
culinary office, though. Corporate office is separate, so only us savages who stay in the back have to smell the vinegar.
I said that, because now that you have multiple, it's hard when you only have, because Trois-Mec is only 28 seats?
Yeah, 28.6, we do like 54 covers every night.
Right. So as a multiplier, you have many options for people in terms of dining within your restaurant
Yes.
world. Do you have different practices in each of them for how you buy food?
I mean, Trois-Mec is a very easy concept. I think every chef wants to have a concept like this. It's a set menu. So, every day I buy 50 fish, 50 meat, 50 onions, 50 tomato. It's easy. So, I think it's a gold concept for be responsible and no waste, but also a good concept also to do money because you have no waste too. It makes sense what I'm saying?
You're
Sorry.
no.
Yeah.
You're very Anya, so well educated
In
on so
French.
many of these,
Say in French.
issues. And I want to talk about waste a little bit because the Trois-Mec model is highlighted for a lot of things, and I didn't know that you were going to go down there is no waste line because it really is extremely efficient, whether it's labor, electricity, all of it. You here's the expectation, here's what it's going to make, and you could just design for that business. You have your finger in so many pies, and you hear so much from so many people doing it. Do you think that on the waste side, obviously 40% of food in America is wasted. We hear that number a lot. The vast majority of it before it gets to the consumer. And obviously on the mass production and side, it is where most of it is there. But are you hearing a lot of people talking about different and unique ways that we might reduce that waste, not just with food, but from a restaurant standpoint in how you're doing business?
Definitely, it's one of our key metrics for sustainability. The challenge for me, at least, I'd love to hear what you guys have experienced with this, but early on in my business, I remember walking into our first kitchen, our first restaurant in Marin, and our chef at the time we had like 1.5 extra rabbits from the butcher case, and he was spending hours making a beautiful little rabbit confit. And so the labor costs on this were extremely high. So these sort of customized, this is about to go bad, let's turn this into something else. We've had to develop more and back then my waste numbers were spectacular, but my labor numbers were out of control. So I've learned over the past couple of years to bring in a few one-size-fits-all type of things.
Sure.
Meatballs and bone broth are really those major channels for us. And so we do now $500,000 a year company-wide in bone broth. In cups to go as well as frozen, and that's something we make in our shops itself, and we then sell, frozen, and then we also make it in our slaughterhouse. So it's been a huge channel for us. Unfortunately, there's a big appetite for bone broth. There's so many great health benefits. We have a huge audience of people who are recovering from cancer because that's one of the areas that's been shown to actually contribute to recovery. So we found a couple buckets that we put all of our waste into, and we've had to cut off I have this one cool thing, I'm going to make this cool thing I read about from France. I'm just saying that so you'll play the song again.
Only play it once. Because otherwise he gets carried away and he wants it all the time, and it's like kids should get one ice cream cone. You don't give them like 2 or 3 ice cream cones.
But that's been a key savings for me. I still can't achieve the great early numbers that I have, but at least the labor numbers come into line. So
Right.
you have to kind of walk that. I'm sure there's always that experience where we're like, we're going to make our own vinegar out of every leftover bottle of wine. In a company like mine, we can't do that anymore. You may be able to, or you may have had that inflection point where you say, hey, that's actually not worth it.
Yeah. No, that's true. And every once in a while, we have to take the cook's toys away and say, okay, fifth quarter's gone, or okay, no plasma this month, or no, you know, it's you guys have wasted your entire day prepping for the vanity of this one dish that you're going to put on your Instagram, not ours. And it's okay. And I want you to learn, I want you to feel that, but don't clock in if that's what you're going to do.
Yes.
It's not a big deal. We're here. I used to do it all the time, you know, but I wouldn't, well, it was different labor laws back then, but, you know.
I know.
It is a balance, and chefs have to look at every single thing. The issue that Anya brought up in terms of the waste, when you get that 50-pound wahoo, is there someone there who's lucky enough to get the roasted head?
Absolutely. Yeah, so well, fish is interesting because it's quite as difficult. It's easy to use the whole thing, you know, but when it comes to like roasting the cheeks, or some people call them throats, to making a tureen out of the head if it's from a bigger fish, it depends on the quantity of fillet that you go through, you know, versus the bones that it generates. But again, it's not difficult to reimagine. Like for example, with the wahoo, we will cut the fillet, we'll hover above the bone, an extra half an inch or inch, not an inch, but maybe a half inch. And then when the carcass, if you look at it now, you get this big carcass right now with a decent amount of meat on either side of the skeleton. And then we'll cut it straight down through the spine, and we have wahoo ribs.
Oh, nice.
And so we'll grill those off and sell those. And normally, like, you know, it's mostly bone, but there's great meat on there as well. And the fillet is so big that we can still make steaks out of the rest of the animal.
I was in Mississippi, and there's a buffalo fish. It's prevalent in the river, easy to pull out of there. Some people say the meat is too soft or too mushy. I mean, I think it eats like black cod. There's ways to firm it up, technique, using a little salt. I mean, Japanese techniques, salting and drying the fish for a day before using it. But I ate the buffalo ribs, which is the famous, wonderful part of this fish, and I believe where it gets its name. And the guy who was buying them, or was fishing them, gets about $1.50 a pound for them. And he stopped pulling them in when we got to about 80 fish because he said he couldn't sell any more than that, right? Which was very smart. Why truck around fish? So he knew that he could sell those 80 fish and that couple $100 that day, minus the cost of his one mate and his gas and whatever was, you know, what he lived on. He did it 5 days a week in his little, 20-foot runabout. And I ate the fish and it was just spectacular. I mean, he made it there on a little Coleman fire. He fried the ribs. They were delicious. Fried up other pieces, sauteed another piece. But I learned so much from him that day. And I felt that it was the responsible thing to do to tell that story, right? Do you sometimes get torn between the stuff in your restaurants that you know is going to sell versus the stuff that you feel responsible to selling? And is that just another extension of the education pie for you guys? I mean, everyone's talked about educating the consumer, and we're going to do questions in a little while because I want to know the struggles that you guys are having with your customers. I mean, this is a B2B experience here. But I'm just wondering how you balance that in your restaurants. If we could do that fast, and then we have 15 minutes for questions before we all head over for drinks and snacks together.
Well, we started selling dairy cow about 2 months ago, and what we've sort of been going through
How
is...
old was the animal?
Just over 2 years, not quite 3 years.
Okay.
So that we can't get anything that's off the spine just because of...
Yep.
We don't have time for this, but we can cover it later over there. So we can't sell anything right off the spine. But I found the meat to be unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's 100% pastured, no grain whatsoever. Within 100 miles, killed within 50 miles, Temple Grandin approved, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, all that stuff comes in, and I eat it, and I know it's delicious. But if I'm calling it a dairy cow, it has zero chance to sell. So how do I get that verbiage into a place where it's somehow recognizable for you, but also powerful enough that our servers can use it? Like, how do we get them into place? Do we say Holstein? Do we say vintage cow? I mean, we throw all these ridiculous words at the board, and we're like, we got to pick out 2 or 3 of these are going to work. Somehow it's going to sell, because I know the moment you taste it, you're going to order it again. And, we did end up saying Holstein, and it's not probably the best way to do it, but just like trash fish, it didn't take off right away, but at some point there was enough, momentum behind the word trash fish, embracing the awful name, and just running with it. So, regardless of what the verbiage is, each restaurant has their own sort of responsibility. But I've always found it about the point of sale more so than anything else.
Yeah.
That education piece is important.
I think we take what's available to us, and then we, basically, it's a chess match to how we sell it. And of course, the better cuts we charge more for, and the things that we need to move, that our margins are so great because we price everything on the better cuts. We slide them in wherever we can, but so I don't necessarily feel like I'm challenged to move through the things because we find a way, like for example, maybe we just do a beef stew or something like that, and then we don't name the kind of cow it's from. Or
Right.
We try not to. We feel very lucky, like I've said already 3 or 4 times, to be able to express all that we do and the ingredients that we use. And we talked about trash fish a little bit. It's like the first thing we say is like it's not trash fish. The reason why it's called that is because there's no commercial value for it for the fishermen over the dock. All right, so they throw it back or they give it to their friends or whatever. But it just so happens that we just haven't discovered the species yet as a community, and we've discovered so many of these now that have gone on to be like very popular and now expensive species that are now regulations are out there to to put moratoriums on them. They have seasons now because they're catching so many of them. So yeah, for us it's a chess match, but I think the things that we use, we just figure out ways to.
I'm stunned at the old cow. I mean, and maybe I'm just the absolute worst person to consider these ideas given what I do for a living. But I mean, all over Europe, the hottest thing right now is 8 to 10-year-old dairy cows, extreme aging. And you just cut a piece of that meat with a little bit of the yellow fat on it, and you just hit your hand on the cutting board and smear it and pick it up and sprinkle it with salt and you eat it. And it's beyond delicious. I mean, beyond delicious. And it's a way to again, use everything even at the end of its life. It has to catch on here because the product itself is so amazingly delicious.
And our cats and dogs are eating it right now.
Like
70 cents a pound for those old dairy cows.
Chef, it's our job to educate people. And I think chef, we should educate more people, like create event and try to cook this piece of meat we don't use that much and really cook for people as a good price. Sometimes I was asking myself, it was like 3 months ago, I was saying, why Trois-Mecs is closed Saturday and Sunday. Okay, it's a very French restaurant. We don't work too much. We close the weekend. It's very French. But I say, why not to open maybe one extra night and try to make the restaurant very accessible to people and half price and try to attract people to try a different cut of the meat, or more the meat, not the fish, but like an experience for people, but be very accessible. Like cook sweet bread, cook some kidney. Do you eat veal kidney, guys? Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a lot of people, yeah, see? No, but it's that, because I'm sure also you never try that. How many people never eat veal kidney, never try it? No, it's not a shame, guys. It's okay, it's not a shame. But we need to educate people. Chefs need to be more accessible and create events like this, to educate people. Because it's not your fault, guys, in America. You're just a young country. You never really have a war here on your soul. I remember my grandma, she did the World War II, and she was a prisoner. And trust me, she was cooking everything. They have no food. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that we need to focus more in America to really, really focus the chef to really educate people and let them trying things because it's not your fault. You never try that. I mean, I don't know how to explain that, but the solution too, guys. We should have a good solution.
I want you to have.
We're going to find a new protein, and we're all going to do insect. Insect is the future, madam. Are you talking about saving the planet?
There are some that are very good.
We need to try to eat insect, madam. Madam? Yes. Madam?
There are no cameras in the room, ma'am.
Or you're going to eat some Rocky Mountain oyster. Whatever you want, madam, but we're going to save this planet. Oh! How about you? Perfect.
But by the way, at New York City Food Wine Festival 3 years ago, I insisted this woman come up who was doing the same thing and tried, I forget what it was. Oh, it was ox heart. I had a giant ox heart, and I was slicing it and touching the coals. I said, you have to try this. She's like, no. And I'm like, yes. And finally she screams, "I'm a vegetarian!" I felt horrible.
Yeah, I want to
only
say
for a minute or two. But I want Anya to have the last word. Then we got to go to questions. We've talked about a lot of solutions, a lot of issues that came up. I opened with a very large statement about a system and a planet that was sort of imperiled. Can you sum up briefly before, no pressure though, before we go to questions from the audience, and then 11 Madison Park has a lovely little cocktail hour with snacks set up for all of us that way, and there will be human arrows directing you to the, a new term I learned today, human arrows will direct you to where you need to go. But as someone who's got the restaurant and the ranch, and has the land and the water that runs through it, you know, what happens if we ignore all these, what I call kitchen table issues? What happens if we don't legislate a lot of wellness back into our system? What does our future look like when you put on your least rosy pair of sunglasses?
I think about chickens, and I think about, our birds take 11 weeks to come to maturity, a Cornish cross. We raise Cornish cross and heritage. Mm-hmm. A regular confinement bird takes 4 weeks. The only difference, they're both eating grain. Chickens naturally eat grain. We feed organic grain. Tyson feeds grain and other stuff. But the difference is antibiotics. So I think that's one really salient thing to think about. You're not using hormones or any type of growth things to make chickens get that fat that fast. You're just using antibiotics. So think about the fact that 2 miles away from any factory farm, humans there have like 10 times the antibiotic levels, tetracycline, in their bodies just from what they're spraying into those chicken houses 2 or 3 miles away. So start to think about the human ramifications. You can't just create a world of super fat animals and then be surprised that we humans are also becoming super fat, right? These are all, we share 99% of our DNA. The same things that hurt them hurt us. So there's a huge human impact that's, I think, massive, and that's already happening, that we don't have the science all there to draw the connections, but it's there for any thinking person to see. On the environmental side, it's horrifying to look at the way that I think beef has been vilified, but successfully so, because real confinement beef is actually a very, very bad actor in the environment. You look at the carbon data, and it's no doubt that we need to raise different types of beef, and we need to eat less of it when we do raise it responsibly. So between those two sides, the environmental side and the human health side, it's a pretty bleak picture. And it is the key point right now in food systems change, right? It's the pivotal moment on the human side and the environmental side. So I do think that there's been an amazing couple decades right now, I think starting in the 70s with Back to the Landers and farmers market farms and people sourcing directly and lots of great produce companies. So this whole road has opened up around responsible sourcing in a lot of different areas. Eggs are also a tipping point. You guys both mentioned eggs, and that's something that's just now pushing into the mainstream of really high quality eggs. Protein's the next frontier, and we have to advocate for better quality farming, and we have to be the buyers that can help those farmers survive.
Questions from you guys? Sir, the microphone will come to you. Oh, we have one there, sorry.
Hi there, I'm Kate. I'm sitting here with some fine folks from Denver and Boulder and all facets of the food world, B2B as well. So many things I want to say, but as a person who focuses a lot on brand and PR, don't judge. I hear a lot of functional attributes and functional reasons why consumers should make this discursive shift. Chefs should accept this en masse. But if I had to ask each of you, what are some of the emotional touch points? Because we know the brand lives both in the heart and the head of a consumer. Can you speak more to the love of why consumers should glom onto this versus you have to, you must change? Thank you.
Yeah, I can. I think, difficult tasks, when you achieve them, are so much more appreciated by the person who achieves that. So getting a customer engaged on a level from I only eat corn-fed fillets all the way to I'm eating bavettes from old dairy cows is a journey. And if you're the chef or the restaurateur who can help them along that journey, they will never forget that, right? I'm lucky that I grew up in a house that's very frugal. I understand what to do with bread heels. nothing is ever thrown away. My grandpa used to literally walk around his 31 grandchildren's bowls and look if there was any sauce in the bottom. And you would not leave the table if it was salad dressing or sauce or anything until it's all gone. So, I have that ingrained in me, and I try to do it with my kids and my cooks. But I think when you take a customer on that journey and they learn to trust you, that's when you really can see it affect, the entire world. And that is love. The hospitality industry and having someone eat with you and compliment you and know that you made it with your hands, that's the ultimate.
I'll give you an answer one step behind that part. Story. All I do is tell stories. Stories live in the head and the heart as well. And it would be the world. I said this morning at the panel. I'm sitting here in Aspen, Colorado. The world is not made up of fancy cars and expensive watches and big parties and show-off bottles of champagne and luxury cuts of meat. The world is not even really made up of food, although we take food from it. The world is made up of people, right? So I think when you can connect people to stories of food through other people, I think that's the game changer. I think when you can experience some interest and some desire to get to know someone, whether it's in a book I'm writing or a TV show that I'm making, you will then trust and appreciate what that person is saying. And when they can make sense of something that you find insensible, I believe that you can have an emotional attachment to it. And so I very strongly believe that education component that everybody talked about starts with spreading the message in the most consumer-forward, mass-produced, mass-marketed entertainment format that you possibly can, which is why I love PBS, I love public television, I support them with my money, and I produce shows that are on them. But it's not for me. I need to be in the biggest audience possible to get you to love that little tiny grandpa from that little country in the middle of where the fuck it stand, who sits there and says, I grow everything myself and I eat everything myself seasonally, who lives in a way that is impossible for all of us to, simply so you can have an emotional attachment, so that when you see salami or sweetbreads or half a pig head or a fish head or a cut of beef that you've not seen before, you're going to be more willing to try it. And I think it's storytelling. What's the next question?
Hi. I'm a chef from Colombia. I've been in this country for around 9-10 years. There's a part of Colombia where we get our beef from, and it's in the coast. There's a salinity in the humidity in the air that somehow gets transferred to the grass where our cattle is fed. And you can almost taste that in the cattle and the beef, and it's like naturally seasoned, and it's beautiful, it's delicious. Now, when you come to this country, you get mostly, more commercially, I guess, grain-fed beef. For us in Colombia, and I guess in a lot of other countries, when we come here, where we can tell the difference. There's a dramatic difference between grass-fed and grain-fed. Is there a biological, physiological benefit to grass-fed versus grain-fed? I do know that it boils down to the personal preference, the taste for each person. For me, I'm conflicted because I have both. I come to this country and I taste your beef and it's delicious, but I do know that grass-fed has a bigger power in this country. And I think this is more for Anya, but I would appreciate all of your opinions.
Please.
So the question is, does grass-fed have a health benefit? And the health benefit is around the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. Omega-6s are fats that are found in seeds. Omega-3s are fats that are found in green leaves. In an ideal human diet, we're supposed to get a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. In the American diet, we have a 1-to-20 ratio of what's available to us. So that means on every day, what you see in your caloric availability is 1-to-20. Typical corn-fed beef is a 1-to-15 ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. A typical grass-fed beef is a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. So that's the major answer. Why do you want to get more omega-3s compared to 6s? It has to do with how your body reacts to these seed-based fats. It's something that's more likely, it's more connected to heart disease and lower health outcomes. So it's primarily about cardiovascular health. That's the only data-driven Trust me, I've looked a lot. That's that data that's out there. The other thing I think is interesting about your point about salinity, there's a burgeoning field of research about secondary satiety characteristics, which says that humans evolved not just to hit a caloric hurdle every day and say, okay, I'm full, but they were eating for wellness and eating for nutrition, right? So they were looking for specific phenols and micronutrients in their diet. And those are the types of things that you find in abundance in like heirloom vegetables, right? And you find more of those in traditionally raised animals. So you have the experience of like you can eat a big doughy chicken breast somewhere and you're still kind of hungry, and then you eat like a leg of chicken in France and you're somehow full, right? You eat less of those things and you feel full. It's because our bodies have evolved to not just feel full based on calories and fat, but to make sure that we're getting full nutrition. And so those grass-fed, traditionally raised animals have more of those indicators of satiety for your body. So that's a newer area that I'm really excited about learning more about. But the documented research is the 3-to-6 ratio. Grass-fed wins hands down always on that.
Yes, sir.
How do you guys feel about the popularity of wild forage products, and do you think that has a positive impact as far as sustainability goes in the kitchen?
What are you sourcing any wild foods and wild foraged foods?
Not wild forage. I mean, what is wild forage exactly? I mean,
Fish,
yeah.
mostly.
A real soft crab. I mean, it's hard. It's hard where you are, but there are people. I mean, Jordan Kahn, who's a Food and Wine 10 Best this year. Huge forager.
Yeah, I don't forage for herbs or whatever, but I forage for wild fish. Yes, I mean, I just buy wild fish. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And I buy them from East Coast, but also sometimes I feel bad, but I buy them from France too, because they're the best.
We don't. We don't forage because I think you have, in the restaurant business, you have to look at where your money's best spent, and like to have somebody come to the back door to give us, like I think you would have to want to do it yourself and integrate through your menu, which I don't have time for, and I don't know many chefs that do. But I'd also rather spend my money. Well, so that stuff comes in the back door. Sometimes it's not that good. Sometimes it's not that much of it. So you end up making the purchase, then cutting the check directly to the person, and you only get a little bit, and then you spend time thinking about how you're going to use it. So unless you're all in, I think it's difficult to integrate that into your menu. And I'd rather have a relationship with a farmer that's going to, that we're going to, figure things out together, and we're going to have a mutually beneficial relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that.
The farmer, though, or the person or that food producer that you're working with can accumulate product themselves, new meats, wild meats. I mean, one of the things that kills me about eating in America is that in all the other countries in the world that I go to, and there's lots of them, wild food can be served in the restaurant. So if the chefs are so disposed to collect it themselves, whatever it may be, and I do mean whatever it may be, they can serve it in the restaurant. So in Croatia, those are wild herbs and asparagus that all the employees of the restaurant, from dishwasher to server, collect on their way down the hill because they live far away and they walk or bicycle to work. And so everyone shows up with buckets of wild things that sit in the restaurants, even from the fanciest fine dining ones to the little hamburger joints. It's mind-boggling when the wild asparagus hits, and there's a lot of it there. There's just buckets of it everywhere all over the city. But I think that also extends to small little animals and critters and things like that, just like small little fish with the heads on it. I wish people were able to sell those in restaurants here, because I think the metric of taking 1 or 2 meals entirely from the wild per month, which is not that many, 21 meals a week plus some good healthy snacks. You do the multiplication, it's not that many meals. But if we take some from the wild, we'd start to eat our way healthier. You wanted to say something.
We forage a shitload. Yeah. But for me, it's also like it's peace. Like turning artichokes, chopping wood, being with my kids, being in the woods. Like that's what I do for fun. So when I do it, whether it's sumac or ramps or mushrooms or, shagbark hickory or whatever it is, it's just enough to maybe have a meal or two myself. But I think the interesting part is the beginning of his question is something that I agree with wholeheartedly, and it's one of the few areas of food where we're ahead of the curve, meaning with legislation now, we could affect, sustainable foraging food forever, right? It'd be too hard to turn the clock back. There is some points, and there are ram fields that I know of that are just decimated from savage young cooks going out there and taking up the entire crown. Same thing with wild asparagus, same thing with sumac. There's some invasive species that we like to do it to, but there's no information out there, especially in a state like Ohio that's, arcane to say the least when it comes to that kind of policy. So it's very black and white. If you pick it, you cannot sell it. If you kill it, you cannot sell it. So when we serve, bow slain venison and we sort of wink at you at the table, then, that's something that we do at a risk at one of our restaurants. But it's unfortunate that it has to be a risk. Why, are there cameras? Are we recording? Or squirrel, or, Japanese knotweed, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the product is. We're not supposed to do that.
When I sell illegal food,
Yes.
and
thank
I
you.
do it, and I have done it, and continue to do it in places. I learned from a cheesemaker in Minnesota who served milk, used unpasteurized milk to make her cheese. She was not licensed, but she would sell it in the farmer's market, and she sold it as cat food. And
Yeah.
she had her samples out, and it just said cat food, $20, a little piece, and take it. I mean, literally, there was the wink was so big, and I thought it was the most brilliant idea in the whole world. So I just say yes, it's dog food.
Yeah.
And if you would like, but if you'd like to try, there are no dogs here to buy it, and dogs, by the way, they can't reach their wallets, so. We were selling to their owners, and then they would try it, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, this is the best dog food I've ever had." And I would say, "Yes, you are right, because squirrel is good."
And there's a bunch of stinging nettles by the river if you're going
California.
foraging here too. So.
Squirrel is
But they're big
delicious.
enough you want to wear gloves.
I would
If you're
love
looking
to
for some
make you
greens.
chicken fried
I
squirrel.
have a lot in my garden. I should start to
22.
shoot them.
22, and if they're eating in your garden, they don't range very far. If they've got a food source, they're fantastic. You can plump them up, at the right time of the year when they're eating nuts. That's why we eat them in the fall. We have time for one last question. By the way, while Sarah's walking over, how many people here have ever eaten squirrel? How many people here don't like it? I rest my case. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for your talk so far. It's been great. We've talked a lot about sustainability in animal production and making animals more sustainable, but we really didn't touch at all on plant-based eating. And I'm really curious about what you're seeing in your restaurants in terms of, is it harder to get consumers to eat cuts of meat that they've never tried before, or is it harder to get them to eat something new and interesting and plant-based, whether that's a meat analog or a completely vegetarian menu item?
Want to start?
It's funny because I feel like I'm the only guy up here without that many challenges with my restaurant. If you bill it as vegetarian, it's totally different, in my opinion. It's an alternative. But if you're celebrating the bounty and you're inspired by it, and you could go through a meal certainly at Fig, you can go four courses into it and not have any protein. And I'm not sure what, if the question was also like introducing a new challenging vegetable. I can't think of one off the top of my head where, we've had to, have a sales pitch to the service staff about why to eat it. But for us, we're such a vegetable-centric restaurant anyway that it just comes naturally.
So your audience, you have a part of your audience that comes there and expects it and takes part in it because
not
built
necessarily
that.
Vegetarians, although we have gained popularity amongst vegetarians and vegans. But I think Charleston diners, because Southern food can be so heavy, and it so often is, even in our hometown, are constantly looking for meals to make them feel where they feel good when they leave the restaurant. And I think that having a good vegetable-based meal is going to do that for you. So I think we're popular for that reason as well.
Well, Ani was talking about prescriptive things and the grass-fed beef. One thing that we all know, right, is that we need to be eating from a broad range of foods, and that's someone's choice, whether they're choosing to be vegetarian or vegan or pescatarian or, me, I don't care. But I do know I watch very carefully that I'm eating smaller amounts of meat, that I'm eating more plants and vegetables, more grains and legumes, right? And that's the centerpiece of our food in our home. And the meat course is not the centerpiece of the food in our home. We'll have, in the summertime, 2, 3, 4, a grain salad, a leafy salad, a roasted vegetable, dish, maybe came off the grill, wood burning, and, a big piece of steak that's cut so that everyone's just eating a couple of ounces. So that's how we're eating in our house. And I'm seeing that more and more in restaurants because all I do is travel around the world and eat out. So I'm seeing it everywhere. I happen to think, I love the fact that the roasted carrot dish is slowly but surely becoming the new Caesar salad of our time. And eventually, I hope gas stations are selling it because it's great, right? But I'm seeing that now more everywhere that I go. You're in LA, so you can't sell sweetbreads, but please, the vegetable thing must be insane for you.
The funny thing is I have a restaurant called T200, which is very classic French. And actually, when I put a vegetable salad or side vegetable, people don't order it. People go over there, onion soup, steak tartare, steak frites, and I put beautiful tomato salad, a crudité basket with the sauce, and people, they don't care. They go for their meat and for their thing. Don't think LA
do you want to know what it is? I just figured it out. You are so purely French. You're more French than any French thing in France, and you have become a victim of your own French success.
No, but it's, LA, I know everybody think LA is vegan or vegetable or na. But not everybody is like this in LA, It's
amazing.
Not,
hey, at least you know your customer and how to play towards them.
Yeah, but at Trois-Mec we use a lot of vegetable.
Yeah.
In Trois-Mec, the menu I would say is like 70% of vegetable. Mm-hmm. The meat is almost a condiment. Like the vegetable is the star, and the meat is more like a condiment. We don't use that much meat at Trois-Mec. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. Sorry, Tanya. I'm not going to make you rich.
Thoughts?
The bigger challenge on that in terms of getting people to accept things, one little challenge I have is seasonality. We do a beautiful broccolini fry. Broccolini's not in season that many months in California. Then it goes away and people lose it. Like, why didn't you have the broccolini fry? So that's funny to me that the season, even in a place like California where you think it's pretty obvious, that it seems it's a hurdle on par with getting people to look at a Flatiron. So I definitely identify with that. And again, it's education and having something else that's easily identifiable and that fits into that slot for them. So that's been my experience.
I love it. I do want to thank everybody for coming. I would like to thank the Hotel Jerome and American Express and Baltz and Company, these incredible panelists, and all of you. Please don't stir yet. I have one last little thing to share. But I wanted to thank everybody for coming, and please to remind you to join us for a wonderful cocktail hour and snacks, courtesy of 11 Madison Park, who are desperate for some love and attention because they've been very short on it for the last year and a half, and they have huge egos and no self-esteem at all, and we need to boost them up and love them until they learn to love themselves. What is the one horrifically political thing that you wished you had time to say, but you only have 30 seconds to say it? What is the one thing that you wanted to say? If you could change the world, had a magic wand, what would be one thing that you would do?
I would say food insecurity. We've produced more than enough calories for our entire planet for a very long period of time. And it's embarrassing that our country, being the wealthiest, can't feed its people, let alone feed the entire world.
Hunger. What's one thing you would do to change the food world if you could wave a magic wand?
It's really to make sure everybody have food, everybody can eat, especially some little kids. Just break my heart when I see on TV or all around the world we don't have food. It's just embarrassing. Mm-hmm. It is.
It's criminal.
It is, yeah.
No?
Sorry, just I have kids,
Cute ones.
Make people love cooking again.
Why?
Feeding their families. We've outsourced our food production. Bring it back home. That's part of food security. Learning how to braise, learning how to feed your family and feed yourself healthfully and using good stuff.
Yeah, just so you know, when you opened that book, there was a picture of like a cow on a rocket ship. That was the only thing that,
It was a dairy cow.
yes, there you go. So thinking about what we do on the coast and how little we deal with beef, one of the things that is very obvious to me, if I had Anya in my backyard, we could move mountains, I think, in the things that we were talking about today, but the government shut down all the processing plants, so it's discouraging for people to even raise animals anywhere near where I live because they've got to drive 2.5 hours to the same guys. So we're so disconnected from the source at that point that we don't have the kind of dialogue to really make that big of a difference. We're just buying the packaged meat for the most part already, and it makes it very difficult to affect change that way.
I think for me, because I think it touches all of those things, it was going to be my answer anyway. It's not a wraparound because I hate people who do that. It just disgusts me. But eating well in America has become a class privilege because folks are time poor, so they can't be in the kitchen. They're, dollar poor, so they can't necessarily feed or have to make decisions between skipping a meal and medicine. It inhibits access. I mean, we have double income families with children in America who are working hard who can't afford the basic things, and it's people ask me all the time, are you embarrassed then, feeling the way you do and with as much advocacy as you work on these issues, to come to a place like Aspen? And some of you may go home, and maybe some of you in your business, and whether it's friends or business people, may encounter folks who say, well, what a snobby, half percenter sort of thing. And the way I respond personally to that, and I wanted to close with this, is that the stuff that we learn and that we talk about here, it's just why I love fine dining. It's the tip of the spear. And eventually it comes down and it's converted everywhere. So I love doing this panel because I hope that everyone in here will go out into the world and not talk about the $200,000 Italian car that you maybe test drove or how much caviar a chef put on your hand so you could do a giant, shot of it with a potato chip for Instagram, but rather talk about the motivation to change our food world and be the advocate for a healthier planet and for a healthier diet for everyone, not just the some, but for the many. That's my desire for all of you.